Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. I want to talk about the assassination of Jonathan the high priest in 58 AD. This assassination of the high priest, is very famous because it's just like JFK, he was assassinated in front of everybody in the temple, okay, on the day of the Passover. So it's like a major thing that happened in Judea around that time, okay. So at 58 AD, a year before that, in 57 AD approximately, that's when Paul, his last trip to Jerusalem, and James and the Jerusalem council forced him to take the Nazarene vow to show that he's still upon the law of Moses. He hasn't apostated from Judaism, and that's when even after he took the vow, some Jews from diaspora saw him and they want to unalive Paul, and Paul was arrested by Phoenix. Okay, so in 58 AD, the year after Paul's arrest, this is when the high priest Jonathan was assassinated by Zacharias. Okay, and Felix, he's still the Roman governor in office, in charge of Jerusalem there. Okay, so now when Jonathan was assassinated, this was very, very crucial time during the Jerusalem council. Okay, so you can see James, all the disciples, okay, they were at the highest, at the peak, okay. They were in full, the Jerusalem council was in full effect. Even you look at the book of Acts, thousands of Jews has become believers. Thousands of Jews has become Nazarene, accept Jesus Christ as the Messiah, okay. And all of them were zealot for the law. You can see that, all right. So according to Josephus, okay, he's saying that the assassination of Jonathan, the high priest, was because the Roman governor Felix, he grew angry with him, because even though Jonathan and Felix, like, they were best friends, okay, because like a lot of these those high priests or high official religious figures, they are the lapdog of the government. So this is exactly what happened to Jonathan when Felix first came into office in Judea. Jonathan, the high priest, was very close to him. Okay, was his best lapdog. Okay, but as time go on, like everything else, they get used like a waste paper. They get flushed down the toilet, chucked in the trash bin, and Felix start to get sick of Jonathan, and then Jonathan start to threatening Felix that he want to revoke him and report him to Rome to get Felix removed. So the relationship becomes sour. But many historians say this is not factual, okay, because Josephus has a lot of bias in his history, and especially towards Roman handlers. So we can tell, even in Josephus, in his Jewish wars, in his antiquities, you can see these many discrepancies and contradictions with what he says. But anyway, Josephus said, Jonathan was assassinated because Felix, the Roman governor, the relationship got sour, and then Felix hired some Jewish assassins to assassinate Jonathan in the temple, and that's what happened. But in reality, you can see that, look, we have the Zealots, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes, all these different sects, okay? Even though they have different names, but in reality, their belief was very similar, except the Sadducees. Sadducees are the high priest sect, okay? Because the Sadducees, they didn't believe in the rest of the Torah, only they didn't believe in resurrection of the dead, and they were the elites. They were the Roman temple. They were the one who Roman choose to get in charge of the temple. So all the other sects saw Jonathan and the Sadducees, okay, their attitude towards those people were the same, okay, even though, like I said to you, Zealots, Essenes, Pharisees, or whatever, okay, they had difference in their belief, but their attitude towards the temple, towards the high priest, towards the Sadducees, towards the Herodians were the same. They hated them, okay, they saw them as puppets of the Roman Empire. They saw them as apostates, okay, especially the Herodians, okay, they saw them as apostates because they only accepted Judaism, they only reverted to Judaism a few centuries ago, okay. So the Zacharias, especially the Zealot and the Zacharias, okay, they saw Jonathan, the high priest, as an impostor. He was a thief who took away the tithes of the lower priesthood, because as the rabbis and the priests, some of them make a living from working, but most of them, they took donation money. They call tithes, okay? In Judaism, some tithe, like zakat, okay? In Islam, some is compulsory, okay? You have to give, okay, to the temple, to the priesthood. Some of them is voluntary. So and when they get the tithe, the zakat or donation money, they distribute it between the high priest, low priest. Everyone gets a share. But what happened? Jonathan, the high priest, okay, he was a thief. Okay, so and this you can read if you read the Dead Sea Scrolls. They actually talk about this, what they did. So they give them name for this. Okay, so he took away the donation money for the lower priesthood. So the lower priesthood didn't get paid, so they were starving. They had no money. Okay, so, but he took the money and gave it to the more high priest and his own close elite family. They got more rich because they stopped giving it to the poor. So people were suffering. And also, Jonathan, as I said to you, he was very close with Felix, the Roman governor, at the start. So he actually increased the taxation for Rome, which is a big no-no. Okay, we know that, and when Rome first took Judea as a part of the province, there was a big revolt. Okay, 4,000 people revolted against Roman Empire because they didn't want to pay tax. They believed the land belonged to Yahweh. The land belonged to God. How can I pay Roman tax on land that belonged to Yahweh, belonged to God? Okay, so they didn't want to pay the tax. So Jonathan actually increased it. Okay. Also, Jonathan, he was a hardcore Sadducee, the elites, the Sadducee who are in bed with the Roman Empire. Okay. And when he came into office, he replaced many of the high position, elite position in the temple, in society with Sadducees only, because he was Sadducee. He didn't like Pharisees, the other thing, so he replaced only with his own sect, only elite families. And these are many reasons that the Jewish rebels, okay, the people who are zealot for the law, they wanted to unalive him more than Felix. Okay, so nevertheless, okay, Josephus said, okay, it was Felix who wanted to unalive him, but in reality, we can say that the other Jews want to unalive Jonathan more than Felix. Okay, because we can see also Jonathan, he also he actually aligned with Felix, Roman governor, to unalive other Jewish sects in the countryside. One famous Jewish terrorist leader named Eliezer, okay, he was unalived. He was captured with the help of Jonathan. Felix captured him with the help of Jonathan, the high priest, and then he was sent to Rome to be crucified. So they saw him as a Roman puppet, a collaborator, a turncoat, agent Marcus, a prostate, okay? So his very existence was abomination to Yahweh. Okay, so all of the Jews wanted to unalive Jonathan the high priest more than the Roman governor because they had more reason. Okay, and for them to unalive him, they would have seen him as prostate, because obviously for a Jew you cannot unalive another Jew. This is haram. This is abomination, or this is a big sin. So they saw him as a prostate. Okay, as someone who apostate from the Judaism, who are betrayal of the Jewish nation, just like Josephus. Okay, look. Nevertheless, let's know what Josephus said, because he is accepted historian. Let's say what he says in Antiquity of the Jews. He says, so Felix, the Roman governor, contrived a method whereby he might get rid of him, Jonathan the high priest, okay? Now he was becoming so continually troublesome to him. Felix persuaded one of Jonathan's most faithful friends, a citizen of Jerusalem, whose name was Doris, to bring the robbers. Okay, again, what's his name? Paula Fredrickson. She talked about this word Leslie. Okay, robbers actually translated as, it should be translated as terrorists, bandits. Okay, but they keep translating robbers, is the wrong translation. So Doris to bring the terrorists or the bandits upon Jonathan the high priest in order to kill him. And this he did by promising to give him a great deal of money for doing so. Doris complied with the proposal and contrived matters so that the robbers, or I should say it's wrong translation, the terrorists, the rebels, might murder him after the following manner. Certain of those terrorist robbers went up to the city as if they were going to worship God, while they had daggers under their garments, and thus mingling themselves among the multitude, they slew Jonathan. So basically, according to Josephus, the Roman governor Felix, he's sick of Jonathan whinging and complaining about him. So what happened? He got one of Jonathan's best friend, which is very dangerous. Now we can say even Amir Khattab, may Allah be pleased with, like he was murdered by one of his close friends, betrayers. Like Agent Marcus, okay, betrayed him. Okay, and then he paid him money. Then this Agent Marcus Doris, okay, he got some zealot terrorist Jews, okay, for money to come and pretend to come to the temple to worship God, but then they assassinate him. This is what from Josephus. But I believe I don't believe that, because we know Josephus, he lied. But for me, from my own research and look at the historical, I'm nobody, but this is my own opinion, because like for the zealot, okay, they were very strongly anti-Roman, anti-collaborator. They killed the collaborators, okay, like the Jewish high priest. Or they killed anyone who was too close. They were known to assassinate anyone, any priest or any Jews who were too close to the Roman Empire. They were assassinated. They were known for this, and Josephus talked about this. So it's very unlikely for the zealots or the Sicarii who are anti-Roman, anti-collaborating with Rome to actually cooperate with Felix the high priest, Felix the governor, to unalive the high priest, because they're just becoming a hypocrite. They are doing something that they hated, so it doesn't make sense. And just like the New Testament, we'll talk about, everything we read, we can understand majority of it is literature, is not truth. How much is truth? 50% of it, 20%, Allahu Alam, because we need to keep this in mind. Majority of things we read either from Josephus, Josephus maybe more reliable, but still a lot of it is literature. Okay, so but this is something I want to point out. But the reason why I'm doing this video, because I was reading the book Jesus Zealot, okay, by a brother named Riza. Okay, he was a Shia, then he became Christian. Then after he got PhD, he actually went deep into research, and now he became Muslim. He came back to Islam. But in his book, Jesus a Zealot, which is very introduction book, very book good to see the historical point, something introduction. It's a nice book. Anyway, in that book, he gives a very good description of the high priest on the day of Yom Kippur, the day of atonement. Okay, what he do, what he wear, and also the assassination of Jonathan. I think he narrated beautifully, and I want to read this passage from his book, and hopefully you guys can enjoy the the beautiful description he did. So he says, picture the high priest Jonathan standing at the altar, incense smoldering in his hand. And it's easy to see where this enmity comes from. Even his priestly garment, passed down to him by his wealthy predecessors, attest to the high priest's opulence, meaning his attest to the high priest's extravagant. The long sleeveless robe dyed purple, the color of the king. And we know in Gospel of John, when before Jesus was crucified, they put him a purple phobe on him, because purple is the color of the king. Okay, they put on Jesus as a mockery. Okay, king of the Jews. Okay, and fringed with dainty tassels and tiny gold bells sewn on the hem. The healthy breastplate, speckled with 12 precious gems, one of each of the represent the 12 tribes of Israel. The immaculate turban sitting on his head like a tara, okay, that is like a jewel crown, a ceremonial head ornament, okay, fronted by a gold plate on which is engraved the unutterable name of God. Okay, the Urim or the Thummim, a sort of sacred dice made of wood and bone that the high priest carries in a pouch near his breast, and through which he reveals the will of God by casting lots. All of those symbols, assassination, meaning a display, mean to impress others, okay, are meant to represent the high priest's exclusivity, access to God. They are what made the high priest different. They set him apart from every other Jew in the world. It is for this reason that only the high priest can enter the Holy of Holies, and only on one day of the year, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, when all the sins of Israel are wiped clean. Again, this goes back to Jesus' crucifixion, okay, because we had Yom Kippur, the sins of Israel are wiped clean from this day, okay, but so we don't need Jesus' sacrifice. But anyway, I don't want to digress. On this day, the high priest come into the presence of God to atone for the whole nation. If he is worthy of God's blessing, Israel's sins are forgiven. If he is not, a rope tied to his waist ensure that when God strike him dead, he can be dragged out of the Holy of Holies without anyone defying the sanctuary. Actually, I was talking to our rabbi, I think last Saturday, he came to Dawa, and I was talking about this with him, and he said, yeah, also because if you remember, I mentioned before the description, on the tassels, okay, had golden bells, they will ring, ding, 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 ding. So when he's in the Holy of Holies, okay, because no one can go in there, they believe that God, presence there, okay. So if he dies or something happened, have a heart attack, something happened to him, if the bell stop ringing, they know something happened to the hybrid, they can pull him out. So this is historically 100% accurate. When he goes in there, they will tie a rope around his waist, just like somebody goes to diving or someone climbing some hole, something. They put a rope there so they can drag him out if something happened to him. Okay, now we continue. Of course, on this day, the high priest does die, though not, it seemed, by the hand of God. The priestly blessing completed by the Shema song. O Israel, hear Israel, you, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. The son of Shema, the high priest Jonathan stepped away from the altar and walked down the ramp into the temple's outer court. The moment he arrived at the court of Gentiles, which is the outer court, almost coming out, it's the finish, is leaving the temple now. He is swallowed up by a frenzy of exaltation. The temple guards form a barrier of purity around him, protecting the high priest from the contaminating hands of the masses. Yet it is easy for the assassin to track him. He does not need to follow the blinding glare of his bejeweled vestments. He only listened to the jingling of the bells dangling from the hem of his robe. Let's go back to what the rabbi said. He'll hear the ding, 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 ding sound. The peculiar, meaning distinctive melody, is a sure set sign that the high priest is coming. The high priest is near. So without even seeing his, all the gold and jewels on what he's wearing, but you can even tell the high priest is coming by hearing the bells tingling, ding, ding, ding. Okay. The assassin elbows through the crowd, pushing close enough to Jonathan to reach out an invincible hand, to grasp a sacred vestment, the vest, to pull him away from the temple guard and to hold him in place just for an instant, long enough to unsheath a short dagger, the sakar. Sakar is a short Greek sword, and slide it down his throat, a different sort of sacrifice. Before the high priest's blood spills onto the temple floor, before the guards can react to the broken rhythm of his stride, before anyone in the courtyard knows what has happened, the assassin has melted back into the crowd. You should not be surprised if he is the first to cry, murder. And this is a beautiful description from the book, Jesus the Zealot, Anyway, so you can see this is the social background that we're dealing with in the first century, okay? Especially this is just before, few years before the Jewish revolt. You can see many political factors, okay? You had the Nazarene sect, you had the Sadducees, you had the Pharisees, you had the everybody. There's a lot of tension. Then you had the Roman governor watching. Then you had the Herodians on the other side. So this is why the first century history is very interesting for historians and so overwritten by lies and exaggeration by people who want to persuade their agenda. And it's very hard for the historian to reconstruct. And this is why a lot of people want to know the true story of Jesus, the Injil, what happened. It's very hard to find because, unfortunately, people lie. Historians lie. And we can see even Tacitus, we can read about him, and he lied about it, how he, even about Vespasian and tried to make it better. Josephus also. Everybody was a paid agent. Everybody was paid to write something for the Roman Empire. And this is why it's very hard. Okay, but one thing we can notice is that, the Jerusalem Council at that time was in full effect. And we know from church fathers that James, the brother of Jesus, he was also allowed to go into the Holy of Holies. He, as Dr. Rabbi Eisman said, he was the opposition high priest. As we know, when Bar revolt, that's that time temples already destroyed. Sorry. In the revolt, just a few years later, when the Jews they removed the Sadducees. The first thing they did was burn down the Herodian the palace. Okay, they removed and unalived the high priest. They revolted for the high priest. So we know already at this time the sect, all the other Jewish sect who didn't like the Sadducees, didn't like the high priest. They saw the high priest was a puppet for the Roman government. They had their own high priest, the opposition high priest in mind. As we can see, James, he was going into the temple, the Holy of Holies as well. This is documented by church fathers as an opposition high priest. And this could be the reason why in 62 AD, when the Sadducee high priest, when they unalived James for blasphemy, if you read the commentary on a lot of historians, they couldn't find why, because James was universally known as as a righteous man, a lifelong Nazarene, okay, who observed the Torah. Okay, so it's how could he be blasphemous? How could so if anything, if they say they unalived him for blasphemy, okay, this could be the reason why, for going into the Holy of Holy or Yom Kippur, when the God's present there, any man can just go in there. For someone to go in there, you're not the high priest, they can make it something like this. So this could be the reason why they unalived James, the brother of Jesus, because he was the opposition high priest. And Allah knows best what happened. But like what Dr. Rabbi Eisman said, if you want to find the historical Jesus, the real Jesus, not the Hellenistic Christian Pauline Jesus, if you want to know the real Jesus, the Nazarene Jesus, okay, the Jesus of the way, the new way, okay, the Islamic Jesus, if you want to put it, you look at James. If you found what James is, what James is upon, this is what Jesus is upon. And I ask Allah to guide sincere Christians to Islam. Subhanahu wa ta'ala, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka.